The way I like to do it is have people introduce themselves the way they want to be known, first and last name, and what you tell people that you do.
Okay, my name is Tananarive Due. I'm an author, screenwriter, and director, and I teach Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA.
So there's a ton of people who would consider themselves horror fans, they're movie buffs, they're film nerds. We're coming to you as an expert, not just because you like it and study it, you write it.
True. I've been publishing horror, specifically Black horror, since 1995. I think maybe the current times we're in have contributed to the success of my latest novel, which is called The Reformatory, and it's set during Jim Crow about a 12-year-old boy who's locked up in a haunted reformatory and his 17-year-old sister who's trying to get him free. So The Reformatory is my most successful book, and I think maybe the times are contributing to that. People are curious about the past and how we got where we are.
And also seeing a present in which getting locked up is a very visceral, easily accessed fear.
Exactly. It feels near fetch, let's just say, that a child who commits basically a schoolyard kick, which is the inciting incident in my novel, ends up in this nightmare. And a lot of parents are dealing with this in their schools and with their children being basically overly policed.
What makes it horror, just as a creator? Like, does blood have to be revealed? Or like, what's the crossover between creepy suspense and then horror?
Well, horror is there to elicit dread, and sometimes it does take a few dead bodies for people to feel real dread. But in the case of a children's prison, it's just like imagining a 12-year-old child in a haunted reformatory is also just very horrific. But I added the ghosts because, again, I didn't want to harp on the true life horrors from the Dozier School for Boys in Florida, which is what my book was based on. I was traumatized researching this book. I did not want to traumatize my readers, so I added ghosts, that fantasy element, to help kind of blunt that impact and take it out of the realm of something that might have really happened to a family member. And it's a kind of a bait and switch, though, because the real horror in the story is history.
When you look at horror films now, what is the crossover moment for you that makes it officially horror as an expert?
So I, as a viewer, have to be scared. And the one thing that will scare me as a viewer most reliably is when the protagonists are deeply scared for their lives.
Maybe that's why I think it's so complex doing very stark political things or kind of eat the rich type horror, because it almost, I don't know, something is sapped from it when you feel the weight of our current politics so plainly.
Yeah, that's where metaphor is useful. Zombies, ghosts, demons hunting people, I'm with that. But racist hunting people has crossed a line from horror to the horrific and to the realistic. And that, to me, is not entertaining.
And yet Sinners is one of the biggest films of this year, probably going to be in awards contention. At its heart is a very basic vampire film.
Yes.
And even though there's racial overtones and like the history is embedded in it, what do you think sets it apart? Because here you have someone, Ryan Coogler, who's done every genre imaginable now, right? He's done a boxing film, he's done a Marvel film, and he said, I wanted to do a monster movie.
Ask yourself this. How many times would you have wanted to watch Sinners if it had been the Ku Klux Klan invading the juke joint and killing everyone?
Oh, yeah.
Full hoods and torches and burn it to the ground. That is not entertaining. That's Tulsa. That's Rosewood. Nobody wants to see that. Okay. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to see that. So you make it the vampires. And yes, Remick, one of the vampires, or some of them are white, but actually everyone gets turned. And then it becomes sort of this post-racial kind of imagery. But Remick is more of a monster.
Yeah, this is the main vampire character.
Man, quote unquote. In fact, he professes not to be racist even. So that's what you need. You need something to distance us from the actual reality of real life horror.
Now, why horror?
Oh, why not? Horror is life. No, actually, I was practically raised from the cradle with horror.
Oh, I thought you'd say by wolves.
No.
I'm trying to, you were like, we howled at the moon. It was quite a time.
I mean, not literally, but my late mother, Patricia Stevens Due, was a civil rights activist who loved horror movies. And I think she loved horror movies because of the trauma she went through, not just as an activist, but growing up in the Jim Crow South. Now, I didn't know this as a kid. I just thought she was cool, and she loved horror, like a roller coaster ride, like I did.
Yeah.
So she was always showing us like these old Universal like repeats. Okay, because I wasn't around when they were made, but
Yeah, yeah.
like the Wolfman and Frankenstein and Dracula, like old school
These are the
Universal horror.
classics.
The classics.
These are the classics of the classics. So it's like
Exactly.
films of the literary stuff. Can you recall the first thing she showed you? And I ask because I have little kids and I'm often, and they get scared of things all the time. They're just like, oh, I don't know, that's too much. And so I have wondered, like, at what age would I want to try and introduce horror to them?
Every family accidentally stumbles upon the right or wrong time to introduce their kids to horror. I don't feel like I was overly traumatized, but I never forgot the original The Fly from the 1950s, which, spoiler, has this terrible ending where the scientist has been reduced to the size of a fly and he's in a spider web going, help me, help me. And there was something about that inconsequence. Like you can just vanish from the world where no one can hear you. You're voiceless. You have no agency. That just terrified me. And I also remember The Mole People, which as an adult, I look back on and I'm like, why did I like this movie so much? It's about a bunch of explorers who find a society of mole people and they're supposed to be scary, I guess. But when I watch it now, I'm like, I just see a bunch of enslaved creatures. They were being whipped. So I'm thinking that's what got me as a kid. I related to the monsters, so-called, in that movie. They were being exploited. They were being mistreated. And I think my mother gravitated to some horror for that same reason. Sometimes it's because the monster scares you. And sometimes it's because you see yourself because society has framed you as the monster.
Like all period pieces, all genre reflects the moment it's made rather than the moment it's trying to be set in. Right? Like,
Yes.
I really feel like you watch a movie in the 70s about the 1800s is different than you watch something set in the 1800s now, right? Like, it just brings with it the modern sensibility and the modern messaging. And I was thinking about what it must be like for this generation that would have come up with the last, like, decade or so, decade and a half of horror, where there has been a lot of what I would call prestige horror. So this isn't kind of like, I feel like what I grew up with, which was a little bit more like Nightmare on Elm Street, which has its own like sort of irony and camp and stuff like that now. And the slashers, this is like Hereditary. You know what I mean? And
Get Out.
Babylon and Get Out. Yeah, stuff that sort of like invites classroom syllabus readings.
True. True. There's a lot.
Oh, good. So how do you define this last decade and a half, of which some people are saying, look, this has been a really big year for horror and we're at some kind of peak?
There is all kinds of horror. Some of it is just popcorn munching. You're having a roller coaster ride. There's no deeper meaning to it. And then there are films like Sinners and Get Out, which do have a deeper meaning. So it's entertaining on the surface. I think that's the one thing horror has to fulfill, is it has to be entertaining on the surface. But underneath, absolutely, and especially now in chaotic times and uncertain times, in times when it doesn't seem so inconceivable that your house could be overrun by armed strangers or dangerous strangers, or you might be kidnapped off the street, like it was what happened in the beginning of Get Out. Andre gets kidnapped and put in the trunk of someone's car. So none of that feels far-fetched right now. And I think contemporary horror is really speaking to our moments of uncertainty and helping us to sort of address those fears and validate those fears.
Let's go backwards. So when I think of a movie like Hereditary, people often talk about that as a film that's about trauma and generational trauma. I don't know if it's a spoiler to say that it's somewhat like Generational Witches is the vibe. I don't know.
You can say that.
And then something like Get Out, which dealt with not just racism, but kind of like microaggressions, like a very modern view of the experience of racism, to the point where there are cultural in-jokes that came from it, right? Like saying somebody voted for Obama twice, right? Like that has multiple layers of
I would have voted
now.
for Obama for a third term if I could have.
Exactly. Coming from a villainous voice. If you go back what are the films from the last few years that to you have that also kind of like richer than you expect symbolism in it?
I mean, there's a lot of little horror that gets under my skin. I mean, it's not even maybe the bigger titles you might think of. There's a movie called The Dark and the Wicked, which is one of my comfort horrors because it addresses caretaking for a dying parent. Two siblings are caring for a dying parent, which to me is universal.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's one of the things about horror that I think does have mass appeal, that it's talking about universal aspects of real life horror, but through the lens of fantasy. So yes, it starts in the real world and how much it's such a horror to lose a parent, to watch a parent dying, but it adds a demon, right? And to me, the demon, the fantasy element, which takes over the horror, makes it even so much worse than actual caretaking is, that I find it comforting, right? So I'm, or something like His House, Remy Weeks, which is it's about immigrants in the UK, Black immigrants. So the real life horror is the immigration experience. You're an outsider. You don't know the culture. You're looked down upon as less than. But then you add the fantasy element of making it a ghost story.
Yeah.
And that metaphor is just so powerful because it also, not only does it sort of remove you a bit from the triggers that would make it not entertaining to watch.
I'm coming to this conversation because I love genre. And that includes horror, that includes fantasy, that includes science fiction stuff. And I love how they go about real world issues, right, in an entertaining way. I find that throughout this amazing horror boom, I'm even embarrassed to say this, I just go to the Wikipedia and read the plot summary to
Wow.
see what I'm dealing with first. Because I actually don't want to just sit down to some truly gory, insane slasher. I know some people come to horror for that, but I'm not really here for that. So I am the person who I don't care about spoilers. The journey is the destination. And is there help for me? Do you think I'm a bad person?
No,
Okay.
my sister likes to know what's going to happen at the end of a movie before she sees it. I cannot understand it, but it is a
But can you
thing.
see why for horror? Because we're maybe it's because I came up it maybe my 20s like Saw and what was called torture porn was the horror that was out there.
Mm.
I actually to me didn't come up in the like renaissance the way people are talking about it now the last 10 years. It was almost like a return to a kind of exploitation period and lots of people have had critiques of it. So when stuff started getting good, right? When people started talking about Blumhouse and Midsummer and, you know, all of these films. And then, of course, in 2017, this turning point of Jordan Peele's Get Out, which was very clearly like this kind of racial parable. I wasn't psychologically ready to jump in.
I could see that if you grew up, and nothing against mindless slashers, but slashers can be a bit mindless. It's just sort of a visualization, I guess, of a fear of random violence by strangers, and that for some people that's not fun at all. So
Yeah.
I
No
can
matter
tell.
what people tell me about the final girl, I still see all the girls on the way. You know what I mean?
Right, it's
Like,
not worth
and the
it.
black person who runs out. Like, I feel like nowadays there is much more irony about the tropes of horror that get played with in these very same films.
No, that's true. This is a different horror era. Sinners comes to mind because there were a whole lot of people who were not necessarily horror fans who wanted to be a part of the cultural conversation, but they were afraid. So those of us who are horror fans were saying, "Oh, it's not scary,"
Yeah.
because I mean, which is not true. It absolutely is scary. I mean, in retrospect, I feel like maybe I lied to a couple people by accident because when
Yeah, I
I'm
mean, it was dark. There's some visuals that I was like, but
when
yeah, I understand what you're saying.
But when I think of scary, I think about Hereditary, and like really super grim and sometimes unredemptive feeling, horror, whereas Sinners was so redemptive to me, even though it has its tragedies and it has its scares. It's about so much more. It's about
Yeah.
the past, present, and future. And like you were saying, it's set in the Mississippi Delta of the 1930s, but it's really a statement about where we are now in terms of race relations and what these interactions mean. So for me, that overrode all of the horror. And I was telling people, oh, it's not scary. It's so important. But horror can be scary and important at the same time. And
I
I
actually
think
think
it's,
that's the key to ones that cross to the mainstream. That is literally the requirement. It's got to actually work as entertainment in
yes.
order for it to convey its other messages. Because many films did come out after Jordan Peele's Get Out, not by him, that had similar themes. Oh, here are some Black people in an experience that's not quite what it seems. Or is it? It's kind of like what it seems. And people were like, these are not good. You know what I
See,
mean?
this
Because they didn't
is
work.
horror can seem like a vehicle for that because what happened was so horrific, whether you're talking about indigenous genocide or slavery or some kinds of immigrant experiences. I call it going after the thing itself. Lynching. Okay, whoa. That now, when I see a rope and a tree, I am no longer entertained. Now you're talking about things that happened to my forebears, things that are in ancestral memory, things that are actually triggering. Whereas what the, I think, more experienced horror creators know is that, yeah, you might want people to, in the back of their minds, think about lynching. But what we're really seeing is a monster chasing you. Like, for instance, in the pilot of Lovecraft Country, yes,
And this
there's
was an HBO
racism.
series that was a while back, and it was set in the Jim Crow South.
Thank you. Yeah, set in the Jim Crow South. So Jim Crow is one of the monsters. You have this sunset town, and you're a black driver, and you're afraid on the road. That's reminding me of my mom and the story she told me. I'm almost going to get triggered, but then the monsters show up, and the monsters create this irony where you used to be afraid of the sheriff, but now you and the sheriff are more afraid of the monster. And that's the fun of horror, is to pull us out of that real life horror, kind of chew it up, show it to us through a funhouse mirror, emphasis on fun. And it
Mhm.
enables us to vent. It enables us to feel both that fear is a perfectly valid physical and emotional response, and fear is real, and there are definitely things to be afraid of. But in this case, this is just fantasy, and I can watch it, I can touch that fear without being drowned in it.
Yeah. One of the things I say to people about not watching horror is sometimes I'll say, I work in the news business and I already encounter a lot of horror, whether they be mass shootings or the remnants of storms or just really unusual and grisly crimes. And I find I don't always want to sit down to something like that as entertainment. And it's like I feel like, oh, that's for people who don't have to deal with it. But is that a fair assessment?
That is really where it comes to the matter of taste. Either you're a horror fan and that works for you, or it doesn't. I'll be perfectly honest. And I'm a former journalist myself, so I hate to say this, but it is a lot easier for me to watch almost any horror movie, even the most unredemptive horror movie, than scrolling through daily headlines.
Yeah.
Daily headlines. It's like, I
Now that you
know
think about it, I do watch The Walking Dead
there.
like all the time though. Like
Oh,
somehow it's like it's a soothing thing. Like what could be worse than this today?
that's what it is. It's worse. Like, no matter what is happening, horror makes it worse. So, if you're in the middle of a plague, like during COVID in 2020, that there were studies that said that horror fans did better under lockdown because, yeah, we all read The Stand. We know what a plague is like. And by the way, the Captain Trips in The Stand is way worse than anything. This is Stephen King's, of course,
I know, I
novel.
can't believe you're bringing back The Stand. I'm like, "Wait, do I actually know what she's talking about?"
Yes, The
Yeah.
Stand. Now, The Stand was published a long time ago, but there was
Yeah.
just a new anthology of short stories called The End of the World as We Know It. And my husband, Stephen Barnes, and I co wrote a story in that. So it's back in the conversation. And it's just a reminder that for those of us who grew up reading The Stand, a plague looks way worse than COVID ever looked. So we're just mentally prepared. It's like, oh, this is nothing. At least everybody isn't dead, except for like a handful of people.
Am I trying to escape fears? Am I trying to rehearse fears? Like help me understand what I'm doing when I find relief in horror?
All of those things. Escape. I remember listening to The Stand during 2020's COVID, which was a very fearful time. And it was escape. it definitely was escape, but it was also preparation. The class I teach at UCLA is called The Sunken Place, and it's about racism and survival behaviors that appear in horror movies can sometimes actually help us in life, because the characters who survive in horror are those who move. World War Z, as Brad Pitt's character said, if you move, you survive. So sometimes you got to run. Just knowing that might save your life. Like if you're in a parking lot and your instinct is telling you this doesn't feel right, but I'm too embarrassed to run, the horror fan is like, I'm running. I don't even, and if I see someone else running, I don't need to ask why they're running. I'm going to run with them. Okay. If I hear
Yeah, when I think of the mass shooting slogan from, I think it's the FBI, where they're, when they do trainings with you, they say run, hide, fight. And
yes,
that pretty much is the horror film
that is
survival
horror.
kit.
It
Yeah.
is like what's near me, I can pick up as a weapon. I don't care if it's a coffee mug. I will brain you with this coffee mug. It's like pick up a weapon, trusting your instincts. I think the more comfortably we grow up sometimes, the less likely we are to believe that bad things will come to the door or bad things will happen outside of our homes. Whereas people who grew up in neighborhoods where they saw bad things and they experienced bad things already kind of have those survival behaviors. And yes, it's rehearsal. Horror helps us, no matter how we grew up, horror helps us rehearse for survival behaviors. And even if the characters don't survive, because in horror sometimes they don't, spoiler, in life, none of us survive, right? So it's not even necessarily the point whether or not the character survives. The point is, what do they do to stand up, understand what's happening to them, let go of their disbelief and denial to accept it, bring other people into the conversation so we can come up with a plan together and fight. Do your best. Find the demon book, find the hidden ring, find the tunnel, the ritual, the incantation, the holy water, whatever it is you got to do. You are trying until the very last frame of that movie to survive.
When I think back to classic horror figures, and tell me I'm wrong, but what I had heard in the past was vampires were about sex, and werewolves were about kind of aggression and rage, and even zombies, people have talked about tracing back to kind of Haiti and slavery, right? Or even just mindless consumption. When you look at the images and choice of monster of today, what do you see in the last couple of years, which have been a weird mix of kind of things that are a nod to past ideas, remixed in a different way?
I think the key is evolution. All of us are using old tropes. You're in some kind of way, it's a haunted house, but then maybe in a more contemporary light, a haunted house becomes about domestic horror and true life horror, right? So Sinners is a great example of evolving the vampire trope. Yes, there's sexiness. Nobody's going to tell a Michael B. Jordan fan that he's not sexy as a
They don't need
vampire.
two of him. Yeah. They're
And
like,
the music is so seductive in Sinners that even if you don't necessarily find the actors attractive, you're like, that music sounds pretty good. I might want to go outside and dance with those vampires. But at the same time, it's a message about cultural vampirism, right? Sucking the arts of another community, the experiences of another community that's not your own, and it becomes kind of a mirror for our
right.
society beyond just the sex. It's also about sucking a community dry.
Alas, alas. I think it's because I get so upset when they are dismal or slasher only. And I am obsessed and love them when I do like a bit of messaging. I think about a film a few years back, also starring Maya Goth, which was called Infinity Pool. And the premise of it was characters who go to a resort and find out while they're there, spoiler, sorry, folks, that they are able to kind of create duplicates of themselves who can commit crimes and get away with it. And I just thought, what a great metaphor for identity and what we're able to do online or think we can kind of get away with. And what does it mean to get away with something? What does that, who are you after a while? Are you, or are you that duplicate out there doing horrendous things? And I thought, amazing. Like, this is fantastic. And then I see other stuff. Sorry, Final Destination 205. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm
Oh,
not
come
there.
on.
Oh,
Final
okay. Get it.
Destination? Come
Get it.
on. I think a lot of the classics have come bigger and better in 2025. The latest Final Destination, the latest Evil Dead. I mean, just sort of amped up on steroids. I love them all. Like I
But are
love the
those the empty slashers, or have they infused those with some of this modern sensibility to get a piece of that pie for the modern horror goer who might be having slightly elevated expectations?
I mean, sometimes it's subtle things. It's not so much that it has messaging, but that, say, the cast is more diverse than it would have been 30 or 40 years ago, or the marginalized characters will survive in a way they would not have survived 30 or 40 years ago. That's its own kind of messaging, just sort of the times. Like I just saw Welcome to Derry, the first episode, which is a television series, and it's set in the 1960s, which is an excuse a lot of producers use not to have any diversity, as if
Right.
there were no, but hey, we have major Black characters and someone standing up against racism. It's like, okay, so that is its own kind of messaging, even if and I haven't seen the rest of the series. It's mostly about terrorizing kids, and horrible things that happen in this town. And there's another movie called Woman in the Yard, which I don't think enough people saw, which is Black horror again. And it's one of those examples of how horror can be an amazing metaphor. And in this case, it's about the metaphor for grief and feeling suicidal, right? And I don't want to get too spoilery, but horror fits that
Mm-hmm.
just right. Even
Yeah.
something like Good Dog, which stars a dog, is about something profound. And this is a movie from the point of view of a dog. And I won't spoil the movie in terms of what it's about. But sometimes you watch these horror movies and you wonder, wow, was all this fantasy stuff just an interpretation through the character's mind?
Mm.
Or was it really literally what we were seeing on the screen? And Good Dog is one of those films that makes you sort of question everything you saw when you get to the ending.
I have always enjoyed the way horror has dealt with grief. I
Yes.
think there's just a whole world, because when you're going through grief, it's so profound, it's so overwhelming. There is no way to depict it beyond, I feel like, horror and opera. Like,
Oh my gosh,
you know what I
yes.
mean? Like,
The
in terms of
scream.
the real emotion that you have, even a good drama doesn't quite cover it. In a way, I think sometimes when drama does grief, it's just sad and long and very slow.
It can be overwhelming. And grief is a great doorway for horror and a very common doorway for horror. I mean, think of your favorite horror movies, Hereditary, Midsummer, Jordan Peele's Nope even opens with a death and grief. Grief is a character in the story. I think the reason it's so effective is because grief for a lot of us is the first horror we experience, right? From the time we're children and we lose a grandparent or even a great grandparent, the idea that someone can be here and then they're gone. And also then realizing that means that we will be here and then be gone, because you can't separate grief from your own fear of death,
Yeah,
no matter
no.
how much we try.
No, that's pretty much it.
So you're right. When you go right at it, it's maudlin and it's sad and it's not entertaining, but horror can turn grief into a monster. Or something like the Babadook, which
We
uses
should
grief
say
as
it's a
its
film about a family and a mother whose child starts saying that they see a monster kind of under the bed,
right.
closet
It's like
type
that
thing.
thing where
It's
your kid
very
sees,
traditional.
but she's suffering grief because her husband died the day her son was born, and she's been unable to celebrate him or his birthdays. And it's just about the struggles of a single mother on the surface and how grief has taken over their lives in the form of this monster. And it's brilliant.
And one of those films that I think kind of kicked off this conversation about horror and how it was doing in terms of its performance in the theater and cinema, and had people really started talking more about it, at least in this phase. The last area I want to talk about is horror has often been a place where women's stories are told. And I've really wrestled with this, but the last couple of years, I think, have shown that. You gave the example of the Babadook, right? Which is about a mom and a family. And if we have spoken about Hereditary, which also talks about tells a story kind of through the women of the story. It's like a matriarchal horror. And even our latest handling of AI, when you think of a movie like Megan, which is about a woman trying to create a a companion for her child. There's another one called Companion. We're really wrestling with AI through the lens of what will we do to these female bodies once we can animate them and have them do whatever we want.
The female body has been through like a whole journey in horror,
That's true. Yeah.
from just the exploitation and luridness of seeing women murdered in creative ways, and sort of that undercurrent sometimes of misogyny and actual hatred for women who get out of their box, think they're too powerful, think they're too beautiful. I just hosted a conversation between director Karin Kusama and Megan Fox about Jennifer's Body, which came out back in the day. It's been a while. It's been 19 years since that came out, but that movie was very misunderstood because it was all about women's friendship and the toxic nature of sometimes teenage girlhood, but it was completely mismarketed as sort of, Megan Fox being a sex
this is
bomb.
Megan Fox. It was like, see Megan Fox's body was
Right.
kind of what the trailer was.
And I think if that movie were released today with a more modern sensibility, when we have had stronger women characters, not just the final girl who's been there for a while, but women who are driving these stories, women filmmakers who are driving narratives, I think it would have been received very differently today than it was then. So I think there have been a lot of changes in that regard, in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity. Horror is really turning into one of those playgrounds that is welcoming to all, and fans appreciate it. I really believe horror fans appreciate diversity in the storytelling on a deeper level because they get that horror also relies upon novelty. And if you've seen this exact thing 50 times, it's not going to scare you. But if it has a little bit of a twist, it's a demon from Thailand, or it's something out of Black history, then you get that thrill and that rush of seeing something new and something exciting and scary.
But can I challenge that for a second? I know that horror fans, maybe if you're a true fan, you feel that way. I sometimes feel like it's a crutch for movie studios who don't want to make other kinds of films and who are certainly scared of politics or political correctness, as you've mentioned. So instead of having a conversation about the Me Too movement or transphobia or racism, instead of having a conversation in a film about social and political issues, you got to put a mask on it, literally and figuratively, for it to make any money.
That's show business, I guess. Otherwise,
why are you forgiving that though? Like, for me, I'm kind of like, come on. It's a little bit like, for a while, all the Marvel films to me were just dressed up versions of films we used to make. Like, you want to see an office comedy? Well, Guardians of the Galaxy. Do you want to see a marriage, kind of comedy? Ant-Man. Like, we couldn't just get the thing. We had to get the thing in costume.
I'm not excusing, but I think I'll push back a little bit to your pushback in the sense that I do see horror making those kinds of leaps. That's why we had the impact of Sinners. That's why we had the impact of Get Out. Get Out didn't make $250 million because Black people went to see it. This was a movie that had people having office conversations, all over the country about, oh my God, did I do that? But is there a version
of Get Out or Sinners without the killing, right? Like, is there a version, like, I just don't know if I see a movie going public that's embracing these same stories out of these hyper sort of fantastical contexts.
I think it's because of the difficulty of those conversations that either horror or comedy or both might be a more effective way, because
like Get Out was once Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. which
Right.
was a very different
Yes.
kind of film.
It's true. It's true. And when we look at that, I mean, I look at that now and see it as really dated, but it was very important in the 1960s, of course, and it was groundbreaking. But I mean, wow, how incredible does Sidney Poitier have to be worthy of a relationship with this young white woman? You know what I mean? He's a doctor and he's, all these things. So I really feel like the impact of those works and those conversations lies with how many people it reaches, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And entertainment reaches more people than teaching. So a lot of filmmakers do try to teach through entertainment, right? It's artivism. And I think horror and comedy both share that quality of disarming the viewer so that you're either screaming or laughing, but you're learning at the same time.
We do every once in a while see this intersection between politics and horror. And what are you seeing out there now? Not just, say, Sinners, right, which deals with this kind of historical arc, but what are we reckoning with now in the horror that's popular?
That is a good question. And I think in some ways it remains to be seen. Because just as in the post Get Out era, we saw a lot more marginalized horror and people getting opportunities. I think right now, of course, the film industry is run by corporations. And there are a lot of corporations sort of stepping in line to pull back on diversity, to pull back on messaging, to be less offensive. You know what I mean? Like I was at Universal Horror Nights last year for their Purge event, which is like an action purge. And I thought, oh, people love revolution, And then I was like, wait, what's the messaging? And there wasn't really messaging. There wasn't any real revolution. It had kind of the trappings and the visual presentation of revolution, but it wasn't really about anything that would offend anybody. And I do worry that we might be entering an era where out of uncertainty, out of fear, out of you're going to lose your job or you're going to be called out by the White House, that there might be more fear about delving into the political, delving into those really meaty cultural conversations. So I think that what we see in 2026 will tell us a lot about whether horror is able to sort of stay edgy and at the forefront of some of these difficult conversations and observations, or if it's going to fall in line.
It's interesting when I think of a film like, say, Deliverance from way back when
Wow.
I know when I rewatched it, I thought, oh, this is fascinating. This whole plot is basically city slickers who care about the environment go to rural communities where they are unwanted. And then it gets pretty dark, right? Then you have the infamous banjo and squeal like a pig. But it
Yes.
would not be out of place today, that kind of like conversation or like the conflict at the heart of the thing.
Fear of the other. Fear of the other will always be the heartbeat of horror.
What do you recommend this Halloween?
This Halloween, oh my gosh, there have been so many good horror films this year. Absolutely do see Sinners. I really enjoyed Weapons. I couldn't guess where
Right.
it was going.
This is the
And
film about a teacher with a classroom of kids, and the kids go missing.
yes, the kids go missing, and you've probably seen a poster with a kid running with their arms like wide. And I don't know, there's just something scary about kids gone rogue.
There it always. When you think back to Children of the Corn, right? It's just like
Yes.
any kids, Firestarter, Drew Barrymore, like any Exorcist, anytime there's like a kid who is somehow possessed, taken over, disappeared, that strikes right at the heart of things for parents, the same way that all these films where kids lose their parents and families is supposed to put something in you as the theater goer as well.
Yes. And I also loved Good Dog. I can't recommend it
This
enough.
dog film, I gotta look it up. I have not heard of this.
Oh,
The,
it's
the genre mixing here is, I'm fascinated alone. This is a horror movie from the perspective of a dog?
absolutely. It's entirely from the perspective of a dog. It took the filmmaker 3 years to shoot because the dog didn't know he was making a movie.
Fair.
But it is really tight. And as I said, it really brings it at the end.
What do you suggest are the kinds of films you could sit next to your kid and introduce them to? They don't have to be 5 or 7, but what are early examples of horror that you think one can introduce? I have a thesis, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Wow, that's not the kind of horror I typically watch. So my son is 21 now, so I'm
Yeah.
beyond that stage.
Oh, but
But
did you have
depending
a
on
stage as a teenager where you were like, just like what your mom did with you?
pretty much, I just watched everything she watched. We were
Oh,
like Nightmare on Elm Street. We were all about it together. You know what I mean? But one movie that comes to mind for me is The Blackening, even though I wouldn't say it's for children. It has, drug use and a lot of things happening, but it's so funny and it's scary. And I think it's one of those films that for someone who isn't so sure they're a horror fan, that they're trying to dip their toes in the water, which would be some kids,
hmm
it's a good bridge because it's as funny as it is scary, and that helps it go down a little smoother.
yeah. Yeah. For me, it's Bambi. Um,
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty
We're on
sure.
different
No,
wavelengths
when you
entirely.
rewatch Bambi, you're like, whose idea was this? Right? It's just like these parents getting shot. All the Disney films are like this. The
I have to
Lion
admit,
King.
I never saw Bambi. Honestly, I
Wait,
never saw
what is
Bambi.
happening here? What? All right,
I
you got to go back and rewatch all Disney for grim horror references.
Okay, I know. I mean,
Uh,
I've heard the spoilers, and it was
yeah,
not attractive.
exactly. Um, but it's one of those things. I think one of the things that's interesting about horror and introducing it to young people or just sharing it with someone is it actually relies on a kind of shared understanding that I think is more complicated than comedy. I feel like for comedy to work, we all really got to laugh.
Hmm.
But for horror to work, we can all have an internal experience that brings something to it that makes us scared. And it's a fascinating genre for that reason.
Well, it's eye of the beholder, and that's what's fascinating about horror. Why one person can feel they were completely not scared, and another person can feel that they were overwhelmed and they wanted to leave the theater. It's what you bring to it. So Get Out is an example of that. If I'm a Black viewer, Get Out is reminding me of what it feels like to be isolated in my neighborhood, or the only Black person at the conference table, or the only Black person in my classroom, and how uncomfortable that is, and all those microaggressions. If I'm a white viewer, I'm on the other side thinking, oh my gosh, I've never noticed. There's only one Black person in the conference room. And I did say that crazy thing about Tiger Woods out of nowhere. And am I a part of the problem? So it really depends on what you bring to it. And I think that's one of the things that makes horror such a unique genre, depending on what your experiences have been, your personal traumas have been, your personal outlook on whether life is good or bad. Ultimately, all of that plays into your reaction when you're watching horror or reading it.
Looking forward to 2026, you said it's a wait and see on what kind of horror we might see and what stories we're telling ourselves in those films. But are we at a peak? Right? Every genre has a kind of like, I mean, remember the Westerns? Like, there's always a thing that we have for a couple of years and then it kind of goes on the decline. Do you think we're at the peak?
Absolutely not. I don't think we're at the peak. Horror is so easily written off, and there's kind of a joke in social media where people say horror is so back when it never left. I mean, it never left. And as long as it's cheap to make, which often it is, it can have
Key.
very bare settings like a cabin in the woods or an empty road is your setting. You can star unknown actors because it's not celebrity driven. It is more plot driven. So it literally doesn't matter who a lot of the actors are in horror movies. As long as you have a clever idea and you can get even a little bit of money, you can make something really, really special and impactful. And I think there will always be those creators, no matter what happens on the corporate level. Indie horror will shine and corporate horror will follow the money.
Well, in the meantime, I think I have to go look up Good Dog now. A
Good
film
boy. Good boy.
Good Boy, a film I had not heard of up until this point. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Absolutely thrilled to talk to you.